Good day, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 2 in our series on Lost Art Masterpieces, organized by the Asian Patron of the Arts in the Vatican Museums. I'm Thomas Ng, speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia, and I shall be your moderator this evening. There are 4 talks in this lecture series, conducted every Tuesday, and all these talks will start at 8:30 p.m. Singapore time, round about now. Today's topic is the tale of the Getty, Venus and Russborough estate. The Russborough estate is Ireland's most famous and magnificent Georgian house in the Wicklow Mountains. It contains hidden treasures of fine art and decorative arts from the classical period, the Renaissance, and 17th century Dutch art. The collection includes Roman marble sculptures of gods of the Pantheon like Apollo, Hercules, and Venus. But their disappearance in the early 20th century and recent rediscovery of the lost Venus among the great arts of the Getty Villa Museum in California is indeed a happy tale. We are very privileged today to have Professor Dr. Lynda Mulvin to guide us through this very interesting topic. She is doing this all the way from Dublin. An accomplished academic, Lynda specializes in classical antiquity and medieval art, and she's a qualified historic building consultant. I also hear that she sometimes dons her Indiana Jones outfit and descends into some archaeological dig somewhere, and she might tell us a bit about that afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to present to you Dr. Lynda Mulvin. Over to you, Dr. Mulvin.
Good afternoon and good morning, good afternoon. I'm absolutely honored and delighted to be here, and very many thanks to Thomas for such a generous and very kind introduction. It is a great privilege to be here to speak to such an illustrious audience and to take part in this very interesting and very topical discourse on lost art masterpieces. And as Thomas has said, I hope to bring you some interesting ideas today, the lost and found tale of the Getty Venus, but also to take you a bit further into Ireland and the Russborough domain, the Russborough estate, which is one of Ireland's most magnificent Georgian houses. It belonged originally to Joseph Leeson, as Thomas has said to us, the first Earl of Milltown. His dates are 1701 to 1783. So we're working within the 18th century, and we will also look towards the 20th century, where we are in fact looking at 2 historic collections, because the house goes into another phase when Sir Alfred Beit will buy the property in 1952, and he brings to it yet another extraordinary collection of works of art. And both of these collections, both of these were very avid collectors, both Leeson and Beit, and they were men and collectors of their time. And what we find is that in both instances, both cases, both collections were subject to several art heists or theft, if you like. And in most of in this situation, as I say, a happy tale, in fact, pretty much all of the works of art have been found or restored, and not least that revelation that recently the Venus Genitrix figure is on display now and is part of is in very good, capable hands of the Getty Foundation in California. So in many respects, I'm going to share my slides, and thank you to Thomas for that very kind introduction again. And I should say it's a great privilege to be invited to speak to by the Asia chapter, the patrons of the Vatican Museum today. And also I'm very happy to have been introduced to you by Father Michael Collins, who set the bar, I should say, very high the last day. Last last week with his marvelous discourse and lecture on Caravaggio. So in fact, he set the scene for us, because we will move from Ireland to Rome today, and then we'll move back to Ireland for the latter part of the talk. So many thanks again. So this Russborough House, you will become very familiar with it. I've just placed a location map for you to note Ireland and our great neighbour beside us, Great Britain, of course, the rest of Europe. And indeed, what I also wanted to say that in relation to the listeners today in Singapore and indeed Hong Kong, you are some, I think it's your 9,842 kilometers away. And I think, Thomas, you're even that amount again. So you're something like 15,000 kilometers away. So we really are at the other side of the world today. And I'm going to show you some slides of Russborough in the sunshine, but also during our wetter days, so you'll get some sense of our soft climate too. So why, therefore, is this of interest, this theme of lost and found to these talks? Well, I hope to show you today that to show you both. So we have both art collected, art stolen, and then art recollected, if you like, again, and recovered from these two historic collections at Russborough. And there were collections of ostensibly Italian art, but also of Dutch 17th century art, and indeed so variously of a European direction, and established, as I said earlier, from the 18th to the 20th century as a two-part history. And this fits in, I think, with this theme very nicely. So the first reflects a grand tour history of collections, and the second is due to the munificence of the collector Sir Alfred Beit. Both collections subject to these robberies, and indeed some pieces have remained unfound. We're going to see that a little bit later. But I propose we examine the collections and the different settings within this remarkable house. And I would also encourage you to visit Ireland soon. And hopefully this will tempt you as a group to think, put that into the mix of your planning for tours in due course over time. And you would be so welcome, as I know Father Michael would also say, that you'd be extremely welcome to our great Emerald Isle. So part one today, then, looking at Joseph Leeson, and his dates are 1701 to 1783, and his great collection at Russborough. He had very humble beginnings. In fact, he's the son of a brewer, someone who's making beer, essentially. And in fact, the Leeson family were not as successful as another family that may be known to some of you, the great brewers who still are, and who came a little later than Joseph Leeson, that of the Guinness family. But the Leesons were at the top of this order, if you like, or of this group at the very beginning. They were a very prosperous Dublin family. And this is an early portrait you see on this side by Anthony Lee, 1735, of our man Leeson. As a young person, he's in his early 20s. But in 1741, a little bit later, he was subject to a vast inheritance of £50,000 at the time. He also had a stipend of £6,000 a year, and he acquired extensive lands in County Wicklow. And this below is a site map of where he built this house on Russborough. These were the townlands in Wicklow called Russborough. And it's one of Ireland's most celebrated houses. It's Palladian in style, the architectural setting. It spans across, in fact, it's one of Ireland's longest facades of houses. I think it's over 700 feet long. And it preempts this whole notion of grandeur and monumentality that these Protestant ascendancy will bring to Ireland during the 18th century. So it's an age of enlightenment, and it's characterized in many respects by the deliberate blurring, if you like, of boundaries between the public and private spheres, and the growing preoccupation that these young men and people would have with an artistic process. So it's not surprising that in the 18th century in Europe, it became obligatory for any person, any person of ambition to own a house, to build a large structure for posterity, and also to have their countenance recorded like that portrait. And the construction of such a pile, this large house, would reference their status set in these lands, and emphasize their presence in the area, in the region, and indeed a contribution for posterity. So just one of the smaller gateways into Russborough. with these lovely kind of Renaissance, reflection of Renaissance volutes. And just to point to a contemporary site map at the time, there is the house, the center block with its two wings. I'm using the cursor here. This pond at the back, this is the rear of the house. And we often look and think of these houses the other way around. In actual fact, you arrived to the front of the house, but all of the sort of emphasis was on the grounds in the background and what you could see. And in this case, it enclosed views of the Blessington Lakes and beyond to the Wicklow Mountains. So it's very, very lovely, soft, undulating landscape. And this, there was nothing left to, I suppose, chance. The creation of ponds and gardens and land, the landscaping of this domain was as much a part of the design. But the pond here in the back that I'm indicating, this little kind of lozenge shape here, was the site of where the classical statuary was actually buried during the 1930s. And we'll come back to that in a moment, but remember that site map as we go. So Russborough, on a wet day in Wicklow, I thought I'd, as I say, introduce you to all of our different our very temporal climate. The domain had Richard Castles as its architect. It's essentially an extended country house layout with this grand Palladian centre block and these two wings, which are connected to the house by these curving colonnades on either side. It coincided its building with Joseph Leeson himself heading to Italy on the grand tour. And we'll come back to that idea. But it was already being recorded and referenced in the journals and newspapers of the time that in Wicklow, a noble and new house which was being formed into perfection. So it was already becoming an eye-catching work of art and architecture. As he inherited such a sum, he could employ this very illustrious architect, Richard Castles. So who was Castles? He is of German, of Saxon origin. He was brought to Ireland and he worked alongside one of our great architects, also Edward Lovett Pearce, who together with Castles, they worked together for constructing the first Houses of Parliament in Dublin, a Parliament House. And just to the side, it faces on to the front of Trinity College. So it's a set piece of Palladian architecture in Dublin itself. So employing the greatest of architects was all part of this growing, confidence of the Protestant ascendancy. And again, you're looking at Joseph Leeson, another portrait, an image of him in all this, in all his finery, and referencing or making reference to, the future in this developing city with its first grand Parliament House. In fact, Russborough itself is very much about architectural display, the grandeur of Rome, if you like, these columnar screens. And I'm focusing on these particularly today because we're interested also in the sculpture. And these are 18th century in the niches. And I'm using again the cursor just to point out the different elements there. These were the different figurative sculptural reference points to the various gods, to Ceres, to Fortuna, to the Calibigean Venus, for example, and others. And we'll focus on those in just a moment. But essentially, these were part of the grand elements that prevailed in the Wicklow countryside, the halls, the pediments using this grand Doric order. In this case, the foot of the staircase, the wonderful Milton lion, which has the coat of arms of the Milton family. All of these elements coming together as a testament to Leeson's patronage of the arts, but also inspired by the world of Italy. And he imported a sculptor to, in fact, in this case, this was Bartolomeo Soleri, who he met on his grand tour at Turin. And Soleri, you can just about make out over here. You have to visit Russborough and put your head behind the flavellum, this foot pump of the satyr. It was one of our students, one of our MA students in art history at UCD, who discovered the sculpture's signature hidden behind this. So Solari Fecit, he made these. And so referencing the fact that, you know, that Leeson not least had the funds to bring import sculptures and sculptors, but to create this patronage of the arts in Wicklow was very much part of this developing age, if you like, and the inspiring a sense of awe to the locality, to this area, the setting, the house itself. There's a sense of perspective from the wings looking up at the main block of this Palladian house. The entrance is this triumphant one, this kind of triumphal arch entranceway. You ascend the steps, you sweep into the courtyard, and certain stages looking, you know, at the pediment, looking rather mossy in our temporal climate, if you like. But these lovely garlands of cut floral kind of motifs, these detailed vegetal moldings of the Corinthian order here. Indeed, the Ionic order. So referencing the classical language of architecture at every turn, these urns along disguising kind of chimney pots and other details. But in all, the main views anticipate these stages, this sense of magnificence, and bringing a notion of kind of English country house facade to the Irish countryside. And granite here is being used in conjunction. So that's an Ardbracken, our Wicklow granite used with Ardbracken limestone. So these are local materials. But interestingly, in the background, it's mixed together rather wonderfully with this Italianate marble, so that the marble really stands out to create these very harmonious facades. It's a very simple, and also at every turn references to the antique. This simple gate into the and looking towards that sweep of the Wicklow Mountains and the lakes of Blessington, framed by these two rather lovely miniature Egyptian types of obelisks, which were so much the preserve of Rome and very much part of the Baroque setting in Rome. So this is a direct reference to that by Leeson and by Castles, his architect. Castles would die, in fact, as he was involved in yet another of our houses over at Carton. So Francis Bindon, who was currently at this time in the 1750s. So Castles dies in 1751 in the middle of the building and construction of the house. So in fact, Francis Bindon, who's already engaged at Trinity College working on the Long Library, he will come in and finish off and reward the Wicklow countryside with this extraordinary house and its fine details. It does inspire a sense of awe and grandeur. In terms of the plan, it's very much in keeping with the notion of symmetry that a Palladian villa would have. The main rooms, the sweep through the hall into the grand salon, the dining room, the drawing room, the music room is here, drawing rooms on this side, the dining room to the other. But essentially, in this case, also the connecting arms leading to the services, leading out into the maybe more farming and industrial parts of the house, the hall leading to the upstairs area as well, where we find we'll look at those rooms in just a moment, but essentially public spaces leading into private spaces. So the grandeur today of the entrance hall with these wonderful details from the pedimental, these are kind of Honduras mahogany doors, and in each of the niches, several different reference points of sculpture, some from the antique, but also from Cavicepi, Bartolomeo Cavicepi, and the wonderful Udre painting over our Kilkenny marble fireplace. So the hallway leading through into the salon with these very rich ceilings. And remember too, we have these extraordinary the importing of other craftsmen. In this case, these are the Lafranchini brothers who come from the area of Ticino in Switzerland, in Switzerland, and they were engaged to create these extraordinary floral motifs in the plasterwork. So this is all happening in the 1750s. The salon moving into the drawing room, and over and above, it's these works of art we're going to look in more detail now, because Leeson will, while the works are taking place in Ireland, he is busy in Rome procuring these great paintings, these great collections of classical statuary. So essentially, and this is a Guercino, we're going to look at that in more detail in just a moment. It's David holding the head of Goliath. But look at the wonderful Baroque, these great Kent frames, these wonderful vernets set into this extraordinarily stucadorian plaster motifs, huge, heavy cornices, and then leading to these ceiling motifs. So rich in design, control with this great Greek key motifs, but ultimately lavish and exuberant in the main in terms of the Baroque. And here into the much more withdrawing area of the library. And again, different paintings. This is actually, we'll have a look at that later. That's one of that's the grandmother of Clementine Bright, one of the Mitford connections. And looking in at the music room. So no grand house was, it was actually serviceable unless it had its wonderful domed roof, which echoed and helped to carry the notes richly through the room. So the harpsichord below and this wonderful coffered ceiling above. So very elaborate. And then one more, just quick look inside at climbing the staircase across the lantern lit landing, these several bedrooms and the boudoir. So they're linked around a kind of open plan, very symmetrical. Again, plasterwork leading us up through. And this was Lady Bite's boudoir. I feel we're probably shouldn't look, we're just peeking in, having a quick look into these stately bedrooms of the later Bite family as they appointed these rooms. That's the tapestry room. So indeed, the grand tour, then what are we referring? So it's quite a period of time, 1741 to 1751. And this reflects what is the notion of the grand tour very quickly, very familiar to some of us, but just to remind ourselves, principally an occupation from the 17th into the early 19th century. And it's the custom or the tradition of taking a trip to Europe, and essentially from Great Britain and Ireland, with Italy here and Rome as the key destination. And this was undertaken by aristocratic young men, sometimes women, but mainly the young men of sufficient means and rank. And they were typically accompanied by a tutor. They usually went after they came of age, around age 21. So it's essentially the idea of a grand rounding off, an educational tour, a rite of passage of young men of the 18th century into the early 19th century. And the advent of the railway would make it much more commonplace. So it lost its kind of very rarefied idea of aristocracy arriving in Rome during that, the mid to late 18th century. And the journey across the Alps, so these are the great barrier to Italy. It is very, very, very steep, the Alpine region, some of them up over 4,000 meters of Mont Blanc, for example, and the Matterhorn. But the crossing over at this side near Gap, beyond Lyon, was variously the most connected and most linked route. Indeed, our speaker, the last speaker, will refer to Napoleon, who equally would have used a metalled road that he had constructed from Aosta to Turin, here, just under where my cursor is. So Torino was and again, that was the route Napoleon used to sweep his spolia from Rome north. But to stay with our 1750s and to stay with our Leeson, and to note that this journey was very arduous. They went London via Paris to Lyon, over Mont Cenis to Torino, and then some branched out over to Venice at this time, or then others would simply go Florence to Rome. And indeed, Joseph Leeson, it's he who's the son at this stage. Remember, he hasn't a university education. He was the son of an Irish brewer of porter, of beer, essentially Guinness made from hops, very dark liquid. And he goes on 2 grand tours. And the reason for that we'll come to in just a moment. But ostensibly, he was wishing to fill his new house and gardens with arts and antiquities, which was, as we've said, the fashion for the nobility during the 18th century. And the journey takes him mainly to Rome. He does venture south to Naples, to Pompeii, to look at the classical statuary there. In the main, And also, what have I got over here? So I'm sure some of you may have heard of, and maybe this is a little sidebar to suggest that myself and Father Michael have an ongoing podcast that you can tune into if you like. At the moment, we're at Siena and we're venturing towards Rome later. If Father's listening, I'm sure he's smiling at me now. I'm being cheeky to mention it, but we'd be delighted to introduce you to our podcast. We've gone from Turin and we've gone to Venice, and we're already embarking on Rome very soon. So coming soon during the months of October to keep us company in the winter months, if you like, in this part of the hemisphere anyway. So coming back to our Grand Touristi, he is in Rome, and he first of all has to visit Firenze. It wasn't easy traveling at that time. You had to have a passport, a firman. He had to stop in Florence, Firenze, to Sir Horace Mann, where he's the British envoy and the main ambassador at that time from Britain to Italy. So he obtains that, and then he goes to Rome where he meets Robert Wood. And you're looking at Alan Ramsay's portrait of Robert Wood, 1717 to 1771. Robert Wood is a classicist. He's another fellow Irishman, and Wood will make introduction of Leeson to Pompeo Battoni, and that's very significant because one of the first sets of paintings that Leeson will bring to Russborough is in fact the series of Pompeo Battoni portraits, and in fact his one is one of the earliest in the British Isles, so that's also significant. Robert Wood himself, you see him here, he's a graduate, he's a linguist as well as a classicist. He's a graduate of Padua University, and he himself was responsible for two hugely influential publications central to the development of European neoclassicism, the Ruins of Palmyra in 1753 and the Ruins of Baalbek in 1757. And this is an extraordinary portrait painting, rather a portrait of Wood, of Dawkins, of those travelers who discovered the great city, the eastern city of Palmyra. And this is painted by Gavin Hamilton in 1758. In actual fact, we're having, and this is my last kind of plug of the day. I hope you would enjoy this more than, if anyone is interested afterwards, do email me. We are having, it's the 250th anniversary of Irishman Robert Wood. So we're having a symposium dedicated to him and his publications on the 14th of October at Marsh's Library in Dublin. So I'm introducing you to Irish culture very much and academia, and would hope that you will join us then. So enough now, let's think of keep ourselves in the 18th century and consider the arrival of the grand tourists to Rome. They arrived from the Via Flaminia from the north into Piazza del Popolo, where they were met, and Piranesi, Giovanni Battista Piranesi, who is also at that stage very closely works alongside Wood and others in the network of Rome. He engraves this arrival of the carriages they sweep down the Via Lata into the Piazza Navona, and you see the arrival of young travelers descending from their carriages, exhausted and, longing to immerse themselves in Rome. Some immediately, hold off to look at some antique statuary and what they may or may not buy, what was available, what was in demand, and other details. Equally, and Robert Wood will introduce our Joseph Leeson to Pompeo Battoni, but also to Giovanni Battista Panini, as well as Piranesi. And Panini is Giovanni Paolo Panini. He is also very significant because Leeson will commission Panini to make several of these capriccio, these views of Rome, such as this one. So this is an extraordinary and wonderful view, and I thought relevant to today's assembled group who are so concerned and connected to the Vatican Museum. So up here is obviously in the background where we know the beginnings of the Vatican Museums are. But this is Giovanni Paolo Panini's render of the great armature by Bernini and the facade, of course, of the great centerpiece, the reason for every journey to Rome at this stage, the Grand Pilgrimage. And there, of course, in the foreground is the great obelisk raised by Sixtus V to mark the kind of terminus of the great pilgrimages and prepare yourself before you enter the wonderful Church of St. Peter, San Pietro in Rome. So essentially, if that was the aim of the Grand Tour, what are the collectors collecting? So Leeson's companions at that time were others known as Sir John Rawdon, who was a member of the Society of the Dilettanti, Lord Charlemont, who is also in Rome, connecting with architect William Chambers, who will construct the Casino at Marino in Ireland also. So these are very renowned people working in the art world, and to capture this whole idea of this classical world and to bring it north. So a suitable and very suitably impressive collection of paintings is assembled by Leeson, with representing huge sums of money that he spent. So he collects works by Nicolas Poussin, by Claude Joseph Vernet, by Rosalba Carriera. I'm mentioning also here Pompeo Battoni, and this is the first. Battoni himself, his dates are 1708 to 1787. It's the earliest, I think, perhaps at this stage of a Battoni in the British Isles. It would have originally, he's an unusual choice at this stage of a portrait commission because he's a history painter. So Battoni, we know him up to this point as a history painter, but at this change, this marks a change for his style. And he portrays Joseph Leeson in these rich colors. Look at those that green is very much a reference to the Emerald Isle and to Ireland, if you like. The fur-trimmed coat, again, a reference to his grandeur, his status. Also, perhaps he's arrived during autumn, and it's probably less warm in Rome at that stage. But that mixture of deep, rich colors, the red kind of pillar box drapery, is part of the fashion of the time, and it's a statement of Leeson's arrival in Rome, appointment of, his newfound social status. And there is a sense of determination, isn't there, from that portrait? Look at that face, look at that visage staring out from, into the foreground, engaging us and peeping out from behind that red drapery. Look there below. There's a reference to a fluted column base. So his knowledge of antiquity. And this hung in the dining room at Russborough in a spectacular gilt frame. There were others at the time, so he had Battoni make a portrait of his son, who also traveled with him on the Grand Tour at this point in time. There are two others that we know. Interestingly, an unknown artist in Ireland would paint in the Battoni into a portrait of his daughter. The Lady as a Shepherdess is the other work here, which is actually by Battoni. And it reflects this notion of the Roman goddess of hunting, Diana. So we're seeing a connection between, not least the notion of hunting and Diana, but also perhaps that links us to the classical sculpture and the statuary that is also collected at this time. So this is thematic works. So Catherine, his daughter, being painted as, set in the setting of the Roman Campagna, the Roman landscapes. Also at this time, so just a few more looking at what he collects in terms of paintings, and then we look at the classical statuary, keeping an eye on the time. Essentially, in 1745, we happen to know because there are receipts for monies exchanging hands. So it's this has been carefully studied, if you like, but he commissions Claude Joseph Vernet to paint a copy of an existing painting, an existing work by Salvator Rosa. It's called The Death of Attalus Regulus. The original hung in Piazza Colonna. It then would move. It was bought by into Farley House in Berkshire in England. In fact, Leeson would have seen it both in England, but also the original in England, but also he has this copied. And it's interesting, the notion of copying paintings. The idea was that it was better to have a good copy than a bad second-rate, a painting by a second-rate unknown artist. So in many respects, this whole theme in this painting is Regulus is a Roman statesman who's captured in Tunis in North Africa, and he's paroled to negotiate peace with the Roman Senate. He refuses proposals, he's tortured to death, and he's eventually martyred. So there's a kind of a sense of redemption for goodness for giving back in life, if you like. Other works, I mentioned Panini, and he commissions not least the modern and ancient views of Rome, which are these wonderful ideas of somebody going and picking out what view would you like the view, of Piazza Navona, for example, or a view of the Trevi Fountain, indeed, or the great, Sant'Agnese, Piazza Navona. Again, you see the fountain by Bernini, or indeed, would you request from Panini a view of the Pantheon? So this is a rather lovely kind of capturing notion of the, going into the workshop, the studio of the artist, and commissioning the work's ancient or modern views of Rome. And these are what he commissioned, especially for Russborough. So we find the Piramide, the pyramid, they're capriccios. This is a view of the Colosseum, a view from the Forum, and then an overt view from the side of, the ruins of Rome. And generally, a capriccio was an idea, capturing the essence of the ruins in the city, the greatest city on earth, the Caput Mundi, the Città Eterna, the classical world, the faded grandeur, perhaps, past civilization, and epitomized in these views of the Forum. But what could be better than carrying these paintings north to have them then, displaying on your walls in your fine grand house in County Wicklow in Ireland, bringing neoclassicism and the classical world to Ireland itself. A copy then of Guercino. So this is Giovanni Francesco Barbieri, Guercino, 1591 to 1666, and this is his Triumph of David. He bought a copy of this, and again, it was placed over the chimney piece in the drawing room at Russborough. And again, the notion of having a good copy better than a kind of second-rate work of art. So again, this is a copy of David and Goliath. And obviously, again, that notion of, good and the civilized world triumphing over the barbarian world is very much an underlying theme. He's also leans into many of these Christian works, and this is a religious art of St. Catherine, or St. Agatha, sorry, in this case, and then we have St. Catherine also by Masuccio, and another copy by Carlo Maratta. So there's a number of works that he's gathering. He also is very keen on these pastels by Rosalba Carriera, who's female artist from Venice, who works in this lovely, soft, using the pastel to capture these different female faces, or portraits, if you like. And then here by Pier Leone Getty, the portrait of Pope Benedict XIII, and the great piece of work, this extraordinary triumphant piece, which in fact he collects on his way back when he's in Paris, the Poussin image of the Holy Family. So this is a very, very large, very elaborate collection. An extraordinary sleight of bad luck occurs in 1745. A number of these artifacts, not these ones, but you can imagine what was lost, because much of his first hoard was put embarking on the merchant ship, the Augustus Caesar, which the value of the cargo was worth 60,000. It was captured by the French and never made it to Ireland. So that these were treacherous, difficult times also. So he has to go back on a second Grand Tour trip. And during this time, Wood also acts as his agent. Here at this time, he acquires these Vernets. So Vernet, Claude-Joseph Vernet is French, 1714, 1789. Interestingly, he's married to the daughter of the Irish commander to the Papal fleet. So there's a great kind of strong connection there. And these 4 Vernet landscapes are commissioned for the Grand Saloon in Russborough. And you can just see the Guercino also hanging the copy over the fireplace, over the chimney piece. Life-size grand figures. Lastly, just in terms of the paintings, a series of Barrett's. George Barrett is a very renowned landscape painter. He's an Irish artist, but these are also for, representing different times of day. So what of the Irish, what of the sculpture you're saying, so that's the works of art, the paintings. So there were a number of classical original sculptures that were brought. And in fact, a recent retrospective, great publication by William Laffan and Kevin Mulligan of Russborough House has captured numbers of these works. For our story, which we'll hold for a second, relates to the figures in the round, the antique statuary, which has vanished, bar our Venus Genitrix figure. So we're getting there. I hope you feel we're building to a crescendo. So in fact, pocket size, this funerary urn, for example, was something you could carry perhaps almost in your valise on the way home. But the larger sculptures had to be, they had to be transported via Livorno, by Leghorn, and taken on a merchant ship and sent back to Ireland. His second large cargo did arrive. So happily, the Paninis and these works did make it to Ireland. But what was he trying to do? So in many respects, we have to think of the quality of the works first and foremost in the colonnades, and what we imagine is that they're a kind of a mirror of what he was collecting in terms of the antique statuary. Simply, the Antinous is the idealized Apollo figure. We have a Dionysus figure. We have a Hercules figure. Across the other side, we likewise have Ceres. We have Venus, the Calibragian Venus. So and Diana the Huntress. Within the 18th century colonnades, we had already some idea of what these sculptures, what a classical idealized collection would be. So also there's one or two very rare and delicate 1880s, 1890s photographs of the house during the last of the Leeson phase. The Countess of Milltown in 1905, 1906 will give a large portion of the paintings to the National Gallery and some of the classical works. But here you see already in the niche in the hall, we can see a figure. This is a figure of, is that a huntress figure of Diana? This is a Caviceppi copy by Bartolomeo Caviceppi of the faun, the centaur and wrestling the faun, if you like, a satyr and a faun, I should say, and also a Hermes type of figure here. So there was classical statuary, was within the niches of the house. Now, what are we looking at here? And I have to say, I apologize for the quality of these. This was the classical statuary that once adorned perhaps the rear of the house, the garden facade. Perhaps they sat in the niches. Maybe they were in the staircase in the hall. That detail we really can only speculate upon. Why are the reproductions so grainy and not so nice? There's only one auction catalogue that survives. So what happened in a very strange moment in the 1930s, these statues were denounced from round wood, from the church, that they were, they shouldn't be on display, and they were taken down and buried, broken up and buried in that pond in the back. So that happened some time back. And the only record we have is that they were dug up again in the 1980s and brought to London to the auction houses where they were sold on. And as I say, this is one only surviving imagery. And I'm just going to spend a moment to pass through each one of these just for a quick second, just to emphasize how their quality. So these were originally procured by Joseph Leeson from Rome. They represent 1st to the 2nd century AD in terms of marble classical statuary from the Roman period. So let's start on this side very quickly, and I'm comparing it to the Hope Dionysus figure. So who have we got first and foremost? In our view, the photographs are insufficient, but they give you a convincing idea of the sculpture. So we have a Dionysus Bacchus figure. It's two fragments broken off at the knee, and he wears this this kind of outfit, if you like, that we consider part of. It's a nebris, or it's a fawn skin. You can just about see it in the complete version from the Hope figure. So I'm comparing it from an existing piece from Thomas Hope's collection, collected in 1796. So there's something very similar about these with the way the fawn skin is draped. He's missing, of course, his head, his legs, and some of the arms and hands and details. Again, an Apollo figure. And the stone is very high quality. So what we can tell, it's a Parian marble. So that in itself suggests these were imported from Athens to Rome. So again, that heightens or kind of emphasizes their importance. It's an Apollo figure wearing a fillet perhaps in his hair, something to tie around. So suggesting that he was, a vainglorious kind of athlete or warrior, youthful man in his prime. So the Apollino figure, idealized youthful male. We also had at one point this, again, reference to Diana the hunter, the huntress, the goddess of hunting, of the hunt, 1st century AD. So this is a very well-known piece from the Capitoline Museums in Rome. And there's this head was likely part of that. And there's another head found. So one or other of these perhaps was placed on top of this. And, the fawn or the little young buck beside her, holding on and reaching for the quiver, an arrow in her quiver behind. So again, that contrapposto stance is something that's commonly found among these Roman copies of Greek originals, and very common, that notion of the hunter, popular in this kind of works of art. So equally then, our Hercules figure, and we know from the niche that there was from the 18th century already, the Farnese Hercules. So he's a collectible figure. There's also the separate head. So perhaps there were two different versions of the same. This torso reinstated with an 18th century head. And the repairs were carried out by Bartolomeo Caviceppi. So we also know Caviceppi ran a studio in Rome. So these were really of the highest quality, the first order of classical art. And this brings us to our Venus Genitrix figure. This is a figure, a type that emerges, and it's associated with Julius Caesar. It's a classical idea of, again, linking back the first family. She is, you see her complete here from Fréjus in France. She would have had an arm raised, another arm lowered. There's that wonderful chiasma, the contrapposto stance, the diaphanous drapery emphasizing her body beneath. She's missing her right arm and her left leg, of course, here. Over her chiton, she wears the himation, a stola, if you like, drawn across her back and draped down her forearm with deep folds. She's also wearing sandals, and she had a kind of ivy-clad plinth that she stands on. It's derived from the pose of the Greek original Venus, Callipygian Venus that we saw in the colonnades. And the Fréjus type is known there. Again, it dates from originally 410 BC as Aphrodite, translated into this Roman type, and known also from coinage. So Julius Caesar and several then other emperors, Sabina, wife of Hadrian, also took to mirroring herself or her similitude based on this notion of Venus Genitrix. She is the Venus figure. She's a cult statue. The Venus Genitrix cult, Julius Caesar builds a temple to her in Rome in 46 BC, and he links his family, the gens Julio Claudii, and his ancestors in terms of divinity to this. So linking him back to the divine Roman pantheon. But when we place the Russborough, and now renamed as Getty, as you see her here, alongside the ones from Frejus, the other examples, you begin to see the quality, the absolute finesse and the sculptural precision and the scale, the detail, and simply that this is probably the most finest of these ever wrought. And so that just to place the collection of these pieces in, and I'm almost, I'll be concluding shortly, but just hold with me for a few more moments, just to note, this was a very large house and collection at Innsblundell in Liverpool, across the water. But you see a rotunda built to house the classical statuary there, a Arundo collection. But also what you can see in the background is none other than these Venus figures. There she is here. And you know, this demonstrates among the many crowded into his. This is now the kernel of the Walker Gallery in Liverpool, but there is a Venus, there is a Hercules, there is a Diana, there is an Apollino. So these were the desirable essentials for any 18th century collector. It was the shopping list, if you like. So what we have, you know, spinning back to our colonnades, the figure here, and Chris Caffrey was the MA student who worked on these. In fact, he's RIP now. So Chris, in memoriam to Chris, it was Chris's suggestion that the face of this face mask, and I think is a very good suggestion, was likely Leeson himself, who was a well-known thespian alongside Charlemont. So in our Ceres figure, holding up the face, if you like, the presence of these sculptures link us to the antique world, as much as, you know, placing Leeson among this lineup, this grand lineage of sculpture, both ancient and modern, the Belvedere, Antinous, Hercules, Venus, Saturn, Diana, they're all in the colonnades and likely also referenced in our Olympian deity as we see them here. So in fact, what we're seeing is what Leeson does is he equipped the collection with fine examples of antique statuary, a reflection of contemporary taste, and this sculpture program completely in keeping with the important role that antiquity played in assembling an 18th century grand tourist collection. The fortune was, again, a little, you know, the treasures would pass, many of them, to the National Gallery. And the estate fell into being managed for very capable hands of Captain Daly for a period of time. It was during that time that these were taken down and to be buried, the classical sculpture. But we'll come back to that in just a moment. Can we then turn to the Bite collection? And very quickly, I know time is very precious, just to consider the house changes hands. So we're in the 20th century, 1956, Alfred Bite, who inherited from his uncle Otto, not least a vast sum of fortune. He will marry Clementine, who is, in fact, she's connected to Clementine Mitford. She's the first cousin of the much publicized Mitford sisters. The Bites, they inherit not least the wealth, but also the collection of old master paintings from Otto. And Otto was guided by Wilhelm von Bode. And von Bode, who was the director of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Berlin, played a central role. That's one of the grandmother of the Mitford painted by Lavery. I just thought I'd put it in. But essentially, what we have added already to the existing Leeson collection was now a huge new, I suppose, almost a sondage of extraordinary works of art, because Bode advised Bite to look at mainly 17th century paintings of Dutch and Flemish art. So it's here, this is why essentially there is two Gabriel Metzu, such as this one, the young man writing a letter, rather wonderful to behold, and also women reading a letter. So these are two of the, these kind of extraordinary world-renowned paintings. And equally, that's the Johannes Vermeer, one of so few that survive worldwide, and collected by Beit and featured at Russborough for a period of time. And it's to do with the prowess of these paintings, which it led to these several art heists. So Alfred Beit leaves his collection to his Otto. Otto, he dies and leaves it to his son. So essentially, if the first Alfred had no children, he leaves it to Otto. Otto leaves it to Alfred, his son, the family fortune and collection. So they're vastly well appointed. They are in South Africa for a period of time, and they return. And luck has it, the mansion of Russborough was advertised for sale, and they bought it in 1952 and filled it. It was the perfect foil for their magnificent artworks. So works by Vermeer, by Metsu, by Hobbema, by Van Rysdale, by Velázquez, by Gainsborough. Look at this wonderful Giovanna Baccelli, exhibited in 1782. It's absolutely known. It was commissioned. She was a dancer. She takes her mother's name. She was on the boards on the stage in Venice, principal ballerina in London at Haymarket, and she first appears there in 1774. Also these Bellottos, there's a pair, and also more recent, one of their last great collected pieces was the Goya Antonia Zarate. There's also Franz Hals, a lute player, and numbers of Rubens and other details. But essentially, what you're looking at there is the recovery of these canvases in a field, and the photo even demonstrates to you the early 1980s recovery of the first of these. So what was this about? We have a fine collection of not least 17th century Dutch art, 15th, 16th century Italian Renaissance statuettes, Maiolica pottery, 18th, 19th century furniture. The residue of this fortune they invested in the house, in decorating the drawing rooms, the dining rooms, and living and gifting many of their paintings straight away to the National Gallery. So they had a huge legacy already. So the Beits are very dear to Irish people and to our hearts, if you like, and not least their contribution to the nation by secondly, but we gave them an honorary citizenship in 1993. But the house itself, and just very quickly, a number of art thefts because of these extraordinary pieces. And 1974, for example, the Goya, as you see it there, the Gainsborough, several of the three Rubens, the Vermeer, the lady and her maid were stolen. And this was really highly publicized. It was part of the resistance movement in Ireland, a military coup almost in terms of cultural kidnapping. And these works of art were held to ransom. They would be returned, for freedom of political prisoners. So it was a very, very unpleasant siege. The couple were bound and gagged. They weren't injured. And these were found not 6 weeks later and restored to the house. But Andrew O'Connor was the conservator at the time, and he managed to do some conservation work, and he discovered things about the Vermeer that had not been seen for a long time. So that was kind of a joyful discovery. 1986, though, in fact, legends rumors grow that the collection was again stolen. And this time, again, it was a number of Dublin thieves at this stage. Again, the Vermeer, the Metsu, the Goya, the Gainsborough, the Rubens taken. And again, this time, it wasn't until 1993, with a tip-off from the Irish Guards, the Irish police in Antwerp, the miniature, the Metsu was recovered from Antwerp, and that subsequently led to the majority being found. And 2002, there was another heist. So, and of that, these Giovanni Paolo Panini, those two here were recovered. These two have never re-emerged. So that is quite a pity. The fantastical capricci imaginary landscapes are still missing out there somewhere. If anyone ever comes across them, that's what they look like. In any case, brings us back to the conclusion of today. So these collections, so in the main, those paintings were returned the Byte Foundation was established, which is the very happy part of our tale, if you like, so that the paintings become part of the national collection. They're on display in the main in the National Gallery under very careful supervision. And Alfred Byte took the occasion to copy some of them, and he has those on display in the house now. It brings us back to our classical sculpture, though, and to sum up, it is the tale, newspaper cuttings from the 1930s that say that these sculptures were denounced for being, not to be seen. They shouldn't be on display, and they were removed and plunged into the lake, broken up. A difficult thing to do, a difficult task at the back of the house. Now, it's the suggestion being that it's these niches here, perhaps, because the rear of the house was where you would have looked to see, the wonders from the grandeur of your house. So the 18th century sculpture is on the other side, and maybe these wonderful Roman sculptures on this side. And there were more than those that were found. It actually would make sense to have a go at digging our lake here and, prospecting once again. So that's a suggestion that is in play. So maybe these niches from the garden side was where they were buried. But so what happens? Essentially, they're sold at auction. £90,000 was raised. The Bytes tried to repatriate these works, but they vanished, only to be rediscovered in 1994. And this is a photograph from collectors from New York, the Fleischmans, who, through several different iterations, and there in the background you can see this, and they're very, very straightforward collectors. So they would have collected out of several different layers of auction houses. At this stage, not clear as to where it originally came from. So this happens. These pieces are, literally flying around the internet, literally being bought and sold in different situations. The Fleischmans gifted this then to the Getty. So this is where you see the figure now. It in many respects, the Getty being gifted by the great American collectors to Getty Museum. And it was put on display in 2016. And I read about it in the Irish Arts Review. I was absolutely over the moon to know that it was where it was, because therefore it's in safekeeping. The Getty Museum is a charitable trust from 1953 for the purpose of the diffusion of artistic and general knowledge. We know where it is. It's being well looked after. It's in the great careful hands. They're committed to conservation and research. And indeed, I went to look and record the sculpture actually just pre-pandemic. So it benefits us to have it there as part of ownership of the work of art in this institution. They're very collaborative. And, not least, there may well be possibilities to develop a collaboration, an exhibition, or indeed, who knows later, what sort of exchange could take place. But at this moment in time, there's no need to even consider these. We know there's a certain sense of pride that where the Venus is, she forges a new chapter in terms of our classical heritage. And Russborough has the art collections on display. And to just conclude, not least from the Leeson collection from the 18th century to the 20th century with the Byte family, these collections were transferred, as I've said, into the foundation. Through over time, the house and its gardens, will be, there are controversies over time. There has been these grand thefts, this publicity. There are now much in the way of copies within the house itself. It is precarious. You leave a wonderful collection like this. It's in the capable hands of the Russborough Foundation now. So in many respects, even though they need repairs to the roof, it takes a lot to upkeep such a house. They have it in their sites, and it's very much part of the collection of the Irish nation. So a series of events, indescribable loss to art in one hand, but the joy of rediscovering not least the works and them coming back to their rightful to home in terms of the paintings, and then to discover our Russborough, our Venus, renamed as the Getty Venus, the highlight of our today's paper, and they're incapable and equally well looked after as well in the main, much to a sight to behold at the core of their collection at Getty today. So I would urge to finish today the Asian chapter of the patrons of the Vatican Museums to plan a visit to Ireland, not least to view our wonderful collections of our great country houses, but of course to spend time at Russborough and many evocative sites in the area, to come to our Emerald Isle, and we are so very proud to celebrate collections such as the House of Russborough. And I hope I've brought you through our theme today of loss and, lost and found, the tale of the Getty Venus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mulvin. What a wonderful lecture. There are some questions from the audience, if I may ask the first one. I'm a little bit surprised that in what we could refer to as modern times, there have been so many incidents of theft. I mean, you're talking about 1974, 86, and 2002. So do we need to make a very quick trip there before the next theft happens?
No, I know. I absolutely know. I mean, it astonishes me when I read that myself. And, it's very well written up in the news at the time. And it actually becomes something very much like, as I say, it's like a cultural kidnapping, because these works of art are kind of held to ransom. They're not valuable because they're so valuable, because they're priceless, and you can't sell a Metsu. That's what happened. The world of antiquity, of the antique, the lost and found world, if you like. There are collectors. There are, those who are extraordinary in terms of the finding. There's detectives out there. We've seen all sorts of cases. But as it did take from 1986 to 1993 to track down those works. And in the main, as I say, the precautions are there now that, yes, everything is so, it seems to have been a rather, a time when, yes, was it kind of, I think it was, the world was so stunned that you could take a Vermeer and it vanish, and just the idea of where, was it going to reappear? And it does. And, for it to happen again was particularly a difficulty for here. And of course, a lot of huge action on behalf of our local and national and international the police at large to find these. But I think to rest assured now that this foundation is really active, and equally, while there are copies in place and copies of copies, as we've seen, we also mainly keep the majority in the National Gallery. And, it's even harder now, as we saw from the last day with Father Michael's work on the Caravaggio, that's also in the National Gallery. So we've many treasures there in. So again, as I say, I urge you to come soon and visit. As you say, come and visit soon while they're still there.
It's good to know.
They're really under safekeeping now.
We have a couple of questions from Bruce Hemmingson. The first one is, how did the statue of Venus arrive into the hands of the Getty Museum collection, and how much did John Paul Getty pay for it? I don't think you mentioned that.
No. Right? Yeah, I have to say that this was a gift. So it was gifted from a collector from New York to Getty, and they're in contact immediately with Russborough. It's quite an open channel of communication, and where it is at the moment is that it. So I think money hasn't changed hands for a very long time with this work. It's kind of passed from hand to hand, and it is now where it is. In many respects, it can only be a kind of positive. And as I say, I went pre-pandemic, the Dutch director, he's of Dutch origin now. And yeah, we are thinking in terms of, first and foremost, we can make kind of digital reconstructions of these, turn this into a very interesting exhibition. At this stage, we there's such a discussion worldwide about, repatriating objects back to places. I think the link at this point, the kind of nexus, isn't it, is the Elgin marbles at the Duveen Gallery in London, from the Parthenon. Once something moves, I think other pieces will begin to be rehoused. But ultimately, because everything is available, because it's we know so much about it, because we can, we hope to make it available online, as part of an exhibition at a later stage, then these things they're in the public domain. So, that it's in safekeeping right now. So at this stage, that issue, yes, it's a discussion and a debate to be had, but the relative values at this point in time, we just have to wait and see where things are going. But at this point, monies didn't change hands, as I understand. This is a gift from one to another, and in that way, the gifting, I think, there's a very complicated arrangement in terms of exchanges and taxation and all sorts of ideas that can take place in terms of value. So I can't elaborate further on that aspect, but this is certainly, from our perspective, it's in safe hands, and no better place right now, so it can't go any further at this point.
Yeah. Okay, well, next question from Bruce is a bit cheeky. The statue is purported to have bullet marks on its back. Any clues as to who used such a beautiful statue as target practice and why?
Well, the house went through a period of time. It was owned by Captain Daly, or he was certainly a keeper. From 1906, for a period of time, there was, I suppose, gatekeeping, looking after in the hands of the Daly family. And there's a suggestion that it might have had, target practice. And this might also be, something to think on further. Were they still visible in the niches? Was that, in the rear of the house, in the garden view? So as the house moved into a different realm, when, it was very much the center for the hunt, the local hunt, very much, family living in less grand circumstances, not that there were any less grand, but just having many many to look after the farm, many to look after. So all sorts of layers of people in these houses at this stage, but from between 1906 and the 1940s, 1950s, indeed, it was possible to roam rather freely across these. And surely, if some of these were kind of half buried, half hidden in ponds, in undergrowth, you could easily see how perhaps they would have been, just over time, just kind of, maybe got in the way of different things happening, maybe the hunt passing through, or different events such as that. So I don't know if that answers, but just malpractice, mistreatment, perhaps, and just
you don't believe it was intentional.
I'm not so sure. I think they've been embattled these. So it may be that they, in their in taking them down, I mean, if they were in those niches, they're very heavy. I mean, it's not an easy job to drag a statue and bury it in a pond. So it's quite an extraordinary kind of tale, really, and it's a darker period of there. So in a way, it's kind of nicer to think of them. I prefer thinking of the its restoration now, and being in a hall alongside other wonderful works of art of contemporary Roman statuary. I should have brought a slide to show you where it is, but. Apart from this one, which is from its location, but it sits between other wonderful pieces of Roman art, and the floor is a wonderful Roman mosaic. So you feel it's sort of at rest, at peace there. So let's hope.
Yeah. So next we have a question from Ruby, which I think you have largely answered, but I'll just read it out anyway. The Russborough estate has had such a long history of art thefts, arguably one of the most burgled homes ever. Why has it drawn such overwhelming attention for art thieves? How many thefts had it experienced, and how much of its lost art has been recovered?
So thank you. That's a very interesting question. And indeed, also ostensibly, there were 4 major thefts. There was one, in fact, in the early 1920s around that time. And it's more that the concentration after the Byte family moved in, there was a kind of a break-in, I suppose, in the early 1920s, which I just thought it would be too confusing to add in. But it was a period of, as I say, the house was in between different states, from the mill towns onto the dailies. So there was periods of time when it was just a housekeeper. It's the main attention was drawn to the collection in 1974, and the Bytes lived a very kind of quiet life in the countryside. They were very well received. They could only contribute. They could only be as, gentle and as kind, and they fostered the locality. They fostered all sorts of activities. So they were really welcome presence in the area. So this, that people could come and see that it was well known that there was a Vermeer, that there was a Metsu, that these extraordinary works of art, were there. And to at that stage in the 1970s, 1950s, they were in their prime, if you like. So a little later in their lives. So, the intention of that, for that major heist, if you call it, was to highlight the Irish, I suppose the Irish, it was a kind of a Republican message, and these were works of art held in a kind of a kidnapping situation, and the idea being that they'd be destroyed if something didn't happen, if a prisoner wasn't released, and so on. So therefore, that changed things. And we recently saw this happening in other parts of the world with other Roman works of art, where there is a kind of it's a kind of a threat to cultural heritage. This is our tangible heritage, and it's under threat and can be destroyed for, taken and sieged and in the same kind of way. So we just have to really, I suppose, in many respects, there is a balance to this emphasis that we place on cultural objects, which are ultimately priceless, and yet, to see our way through this. It doesn't help. It doesn't solve anything, except it's a loss. So they were recovered in the main. In fact, it's kind of one of those tales. It was through simple detective work that they didn't get very far with them. They were taken to County Cork and kept in a cottage, and they were all recovered. The second time round, it was actually a straightforward robbery, where they were robbed in 1980s, taken, and that's what provoked the memory. And this is the odd sort of twist of the tale, is the head gardener at that time was the person who dug up the sculpture, because he remembered being a young boy who witnessed the taking down and the burying and the breaking up of the sculpture, the Roman sculpture, that is. So when the bigger robbery took place, he remembered this, and he kind of carted those pieces off to London, where they were in some warehouse for some time before they were sold. So there's a lot of murky pasts that go on, but that straightforward theft was major. And as the question is, Lucy, very, they drove a kind of a big Range Rover, a big car, up the front steps and kind of batter down. So, it has this, as you say, the most burgled kind of story, and not to focus on that, but the international police were extraordinary, and they recovered all but 2 works. So, that in itself is a huge kind of, we are supported, and it is through our good offices, that collectively is how we, can kind of, I suppose, stand against this kind of thing, or just, in that a dealer or whatever, the antique market, or that somebody recognized that these are pieces of value. that they don't have a value, because you can't, there's no point in selling them. You know, you can't sell a Vermeer, you can't sell a Roman sculpture like this, you know. So to gift it now was such a good end, a good tale for that. And equally, that the police recovered so many of those. There are 2 outstanding in the main. So yes, it seems, I suppose it's all of us, for our human endeavor to keep countenance of these objects, rather than, you know, squirreling them into somebody's private, into a wall in a room where only maybe one person can see them. So many can come and visit these now in the National Gallery in Dublin, and you see the Caravaggio, for example. You can see the Vermeer, and we recently had a very large Vermeer exhibition. So there's a kind of quite a digital footprint now of these works, so that equally enables access further to the works of art. So I hope that answers somehow that question.
Okay. Next, a quick question from William Cheng. How much was the stolen Roman sculptures from the Russborough house sold to the London auction house for? I think there were a number of pieces, right? 5 pieces, were they? Yeah.
There were 5 pieces, but there was also a number of the heads, and so over and above, I think there was some like 90,000 or something. It was reported in the papers at the time. And again, you know, it's just one of those things that the Byte family did attempt to rail against it, but again, you know, it's very often these things are they just become so complicated, I think, you know, and in the end, better to just leave things, you know, where they are. And their major, after these acts, you know, it sort of had them work into the realm of copying. So they copied then what they had and put those back up on the walls to take away that kind of this idea of this magnet, this attraction, you know, and then the recovery of these in 1993 meant, and then they set up the foundation. So in fact, it pushes it further from their own responsibility into our, you know, the national hands at work. But we're still very indebted to them entirely. And as I say, the Russborough estate itself is an extraordinary domain, and you know, they do an extraordinary job. You know.
We perhaps have time for just one more question from Maria Pereira. On the Getty side, I see a different image for the Getty Venus, one of Venus sitting and touching her foot. Can you please clarify? Yeah.
So that's, as I say, this one sits within a room full of different. There are several different versions of the Venus. One is, you know, like that, she's tying a sandal. There's another where, you know, she's at her toilette. There's several versions from Praxiteles, and, you know, Polygnotus. There's several other sculptors that created these, and that this particular version was taken into to represent the Venus Genitrix, the gens Claudii, the Julius family of Julius Caesar. That was his doing. So he chose this version rather than, you know, the Capitoline bathing Venus or the Venus tying her sandals. So there are several different versions and different copies. Don't forget, the Roman sculptor atelier were very good at copying. So they made copies of these Greek sculptures, and they found their way into many bathhouses, in baths of Titus in Rome or baths of Trajan and so on. So, you know, this is it was a practice. So we're not surprised to find 3 or 4 different types of Venus type sculpture in that collection and in other large collections. If you look at the Louvre, we're going to see wonderful things at the last lecture of works of art that came from Rome to the Louvre via Napoleon. And again, as I say, you'll see different types of Venus figures then. So I think it's just one way of interpreting, but they have several different versions in the Getty.
Okay, well, I think we have to wrap up now. Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture and addressing all our questions so well. So lecture 3, the next one is the next Tuesday at the same time, where we will learn about the extraordinary story of Leonardo's Last Supper, and from none other than Maria Cristina White de Cruz. So do join us for this rare insight into this very iconic piece of art. I hope this talk, or rather this entire series, will entice you to join the APAVM as a patron or friend of APAVM. You may visit our website for more information or just scan the QR codes on the screen now. Thank you again, Lynda. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience. May I also thank the APVM team of administrators and technical staff who helped put this together and run this webinar and this entire lecture series. And of course, thank you to our chairman, Ben, for masterminding this whole thing. We look forward to seeing all of you again next week, same time, same place. Bye.